With enough time having passed in version 2.5, you may now be curious about the frenzy or hype of the new spending event and whether day one impressions have stayed the same. Worry not though, as today we'll be talking about both the agent and W engine selectors given to players if they've spent enough, but as a reminder, this is purely advice from my own experiences in Zenless, and ultimately the choice is yours when it comes to making the final call. However, with this, if today's video was helpful or if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But without further ado, let's break down everything you need to know about version 2.5's spending event. Before we actually address each of the options available from the W engine and agent section, let's actually take a moment to talk about other rewards available in the spending event. Depending on the spending level that you reach, you will receive ether batteries that now act as sweep tickets to let you clear content quickly, a tuning calibrator, and 2 resonating cores that let you choose both main and substats now, and you're even granted 2 accessories for the proxies, which I found to look pretty cool. That said, these are all rewards that you receive between the 300 and 4,000 tickets tier, with even more limited decorations being given at 15,000 tickets. To be clear, these limited decorations are also pretty unique, with them being animated or new thematics being added to your customizable inventory, but as I'm sure is the case for most players, the engine and agent selectors are what's most valued in this case and cost roughly $100 and $150 respectively. To start though, let's talk about engines, as this is the first breakpoint you'll reach when spending. Now unfortunately, the free W engine here isn't really as valuable anymore, since we've recently discovered that the gold currency, also known as microcontroller units, are now unlimitedly exchangeable for 60 W engine chips, and you can receive said W engine chips from cycling A rank engines or even from weekly shops like at the Deadly Assault / Shiyu Outpost. That said, there are a few worthwhile and noteworthy engines from the list that still remain. Brimstone is a solid choice if your account is more attack focused, and especially so if you plan on using characters like Yaeshun Guang while skipping their signature W engines. From what we've seen and tested though, rank 5 Brimstone is also fairly close to Yaeshun Guang's W engine in performance, with a sub 10% gap in performance. But Weeping Cradle by comparison is more situational, though it's certainly usable if you're lacking support W engines. That said, there are also engines I'd recommend avoiding altogether, and the first of which is Restraint. This truly is one of the most niche and underwhelming engines, with limited use on Trigger or Jufufu at best, and in most cases, current stunners have shown preferences for engines that have team damage providing passives, or even ones that have energy regen instead. Fusion Compiler is slightly better in being usable on anomaly agents in general, but the craftable Weeping Gemini or even a rank 5 Electro Lip Gloss are almost always more consistent performance-wise. Hellfire Gears is also technically an option that I would recommend, especially on characters like Lycon and Mono Ice Teams or Dylan, but this is definitely not necessary in most cases, as craftable A-rank alternatives like Fossilized Core or Steam Oven are still competitive. Finally though, a Steel Cushion is also decent, with it being usable for a lot of attack or even physical agents, but this is frequently just worse than Brimstone, especially if you aren't able to maintain uptime on its passive. Now let's move to limited W engines. If you're looking for one of the best overall engines from the version 2.5 selector, Sharpened Stinger is a strong and safe pick for most accounts, but it really depends on what you're lacking. Sharpened Stinger is Jane's best general option, works extremely well on Piper and Alice, and it grants you anomaly proficiency, an extremely important stat that Jane specifically needs to fully activate her core passive without relying on Yuzuha or her signature W engine. By contrast, Bernice's signature is one of the least flexible options for any account, as it's truly only best with Bernice herself, but in fairness to those who've spent and are looking to invest in potential 6 of Bernice, her engine is actually quite good for herself. Finally, Ice Jade Teapot does provide a solid 20% damage increase to the team for 10 seconds, but maintaining and using this passive can be difficult depending on the stun agent or boss. Ultimately though, as many other powerful stun agents like Dylan have preferences again for either energy regen or can't make good use of the passive, this feels less worthwhile overall. My recommendation though, across all engines, standard or limited however, would be to take either Sharpened Stinger, Brimstone, or even Bernice's signature if you're all in on her buffs. However, as a quick reminder, specifically for Bernice's signature does have competition even on her, with Alice's signature being very close and competitive to it performance-wise, with a sub 5% gap when used. Unlike the engine section, there are actually many good options to choose from among the selectable agents, and truthfully, though I personally prioritize making sure to complete and obtain any missing agents as my #1 priority, Zenless has been out for a while now, and there are other factors to consider at this point. With this, let's start by talking about each standard agent. Nekomata is one of the most underplayed and unfortunately weakest agents from this list, but in fairness to her performance, she is likely soon to receive a buff, as the Zenless devs themselves have confirmed that all standard agents will be receiving adjustments to remain competitive in endgame modes. However, even without accounting for a future buff, Nekomata does still perform okay when paired with characters like Dylan or Seed, and when used against a boss that has physical weakness, like with Primordial Nightmare. Characters like Kaleda and Rina share similar issues where, though there may be specific scenarios where they they can compete or have niche value, the reality is that said characters are simply waiting for a buff or are otherwise replaceable / carried by their limited partners. In fairness to Rina though, she does have a stronger presence in Zenless, with her being able to support electric-based teams in a meaningful way. But as every player who has tried Rina has likely felt, this is one of the most frustrating characters to play if you don't have her first Mindscape, as the window to reapply her buffs is much shorter and they've essentially locked away some of her strength and quality of life away in a Mindscape where most other buffing agents have double or even triple the length of her buff durations by comparison. Now formerly I had seen lots of conversation around Lycon being one of the best selector options for an account when the 2.5 livestream first aired, and though he definitely is still at the top end or maybe even the first / second best choice in this list, with his Mono Ice Miyabi team and Yadhari teams still performing well, the post-rupture period of endgame content has arrived and he certainly isn't miles and leagues ahead of other options anymore. To be clear, there is so much potential when it comes to his freeze and ice shred, especially when Monoto, Wandering Hunter, or enemies like Bringer return to endgame modes, but the reality is that Lycon is by no means an easy character to play in every team lineup. Regardless of his absolutely shocking score lines when first used in Mono Ice, or even best in slot performances as a stunner when used with Yadhari, Lycon does require practice and can take time to get used to, and though this shouldn't be the only reason you consider when evaluating him, he does perform worse than agents like Yuzaha, Lighter, or Jafufu for the average untrained player. Now at this point, you might be wondering whether Soldier 11 or Grace have become significantly better since their buffs and potentials were released, and the answer is kind of. Soldier 11 has become much more fun to play and performs decently score-wise too, and to add to this, the current Shiyu defense allows her to showcase just how strong she can be against aggressive enemies. However, Soldier doesn't really have a strong deadly assault boss who's shown themselves in recent rotations, but that said, players are trying their best to slam their heads into Wandering Hunter with her if they don't have Banyue, Yadhari, Ishuen, or Monoto, and realistically, if you're looking to M6 any of the characters on this list, Soldier does gain decent value from her Mindscapes. Unfortunately though, Soldier 11 does still have to compete with Evelyn, and though other agents can sometimes argue that similar element DPS have different roles or niches to fill, Soldier 11 and Evelyn effectively do the exact same thing. Grace by comparison is in an even worse spot, and as I mentioned in my updated video on Grace, I'm really coping and hoping that the Angels of Delusion will offer some sort of buff to anomalies specifically and allow Grace to shine even more. That said, Grace's buffs do make her funnier to play and deal more damage, but ultimately this hasn't shown itself to be enough value-wise to even be competitive to Yanagi, regardless if Grace is being used as a main or sub DPS. If we move to limited agents, this is where things get really tough decision-wise though. Truthfully, every one of these agents when played during a specific window or during a period where agents have powerful buffs can be strong, but there are some important details to consider here if you want to make the right choice for your account. Let's start with Bernice. Bernice post buff is decent, but just like with Soldier 11, the main issue that follows her is lacking a real boss where you'd want to take her. Where Soldier 11 at least technically has a boss though in Wandering Hunter, where you can try and squeeze out as much damage as possible, Anomaly agents and especially Bernice haven't seen the Anomaly Butcher in a while and otherwise have only seen Bringer / Miasmic Fiend recently. Now in fairness to Bernice, she does have decent matchups in Shiyu defense, but Miasmic Fiend, who is the main Anomaly boss for Deadly Assault, is resistant to fire, which makes her much weaker. However, if we move away from just matchups and endgame modes, the changes to Bernice herself are pretty decent. The gameplay adjustments specifically now allow her to spend more time on field, which does make her more interesting to play, but even the multiplier or numerical changes to her are noteworthy, with her actually being quite strong at P6 with her signature. Jane has also received a free skin in version 2.5, which really should justify picking her in this case, but even in terms of performance, having access to her is solid as she's a great pairing to agents like Vivian or even Alice depending on your goal. To add to this, her second Mindscape is very powerful, and when paired together with Alice, M2 Jane can be one of the stronger anomaly duos in the game. However, Jane alone at M0 does have competition, as Piper does also perform similarly to her, but something I'd like to point out about Piper versus Jane comparisons is that Piper definitely feels more vulnerable and requires more planning to play, where Jane feels much more reactive and more evasive. Now this does really just mean that if you're good with Piper, you'll definitely have less problems competing with Jane, especially with Piper's M6, but the number of times that I've gotten close to or just flat out die with Piper when playing her is quite embarrassing, so at least anecdotally, I'd like to add that disclaimer when considering or comparing Piper and Jane. Finally though, we have Qingyi. Qingyi is still one of the strongest supportive agents that Zenless has ever released, but much like Miyabi, she is no longer the simple plug-and-play unit that she was initially presented as back in version 1.1. Her fast phase generation and ability to increase enemy stun damage are definitely valuable, but actually gaining that value now requires more effort and planning than before. This becomes especially true when pairing her with characters like Haramasa, Jiyuen, or even Ishuen specifically, where Qingyi can perform amazingly, particularly in fights like with the Miasma Priest when played correctly, but as As many endgame players and creators have pointed out, maximizing your score now sometimes revolves around increasing the total number of stun windows that you can achieve in a single fight, and this is a concept that directly impacts stunners more than most other roles. Because of this, optimizing or playing Chang'e at her best is no longer just about avoiding energy overcap or fully applying her stun damage multiplier. She now at a baseline does feel more inclined to apply more daze and sometimes even reach an additional stun window, otherwise her overall value can start to feel like it's falling behind. Among all agents, however, I would personally recommend Chang'e or Lycan as some of the best value agents from the Selector in isolation, but there really is so much more to consider here from an account-wide point of view. If you don't have characters like Haramasa, Jiyuan, or Yi Xuan, Chang'e's value is much lower on average, and if you don't have Vivian, Yuzuha, or Alice, Jane's value also drops dramatically as well. Even in Lycan's case, if there's no Yidhari, Miyabi, or Hugo on an account, there's even less reason to take him than the others. Finally, there is also the value of chasing an additional Mindscape from the Selector, as there are very good options with things like Rina's M1, Jane's M2, Chang'e's M1, M2, or even Soldier's M1, but ultimately there are so many choices to make here that I would encourage you to think carefully before making your own choice, as initial choices or reactions made as soon as version 2.5 dropped may not actually be as relevant as the patch has continued on. That's going to be it for today's video though. Thanks again for all the support as of late on the channel. It's been absolutely amazing, and I hope this video helped clear up any misunderstandings or helped guide you in this new spending event. As a reminder though, this video is primarily about the W engine and agent Selector should you choose to take part in the activity, and of course at the end of the day you are more than welcome to avoid or ignore this event entirely. Thanks again for watching though guys. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.